Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday with your family and friends. I'm Donna Martinez. Want to welcome you all to the John Locke Foundation. We've got a full house today. No surprise. We had a feeling that when we announced that John was going to be talking about the future of the freedom movement and what the elections mean to all that, that a lot of you would be interested in coming. So thank you for joining us. Okay, I see some of you have your lunches. By the way, please feel free to bring your lunch to these presentations. It's very informal, so it's not a problem at all. Just come on in, have some lunch with us, and enjoy our speakers. How many of you have turkey or ham somewhere? There you go, John. All right, that's waiting for me at home this evening. So, but I'm lucky my husband's a great cook, so turkey, I will take that for, I think, the third meal in the last couple of days, but that's okay. Now, of course, today is Cyber Monday. Have any of you been online yet? No one here. Okay. Jane is sort of doing this. All right. We know it's a big day and the kickoff of the holiday season along with Black Friday, of course. The reason I bring that up is this. Tomorrow is what's known as Giving Tuesday, and that has become a tradition in the nonprofit world the last couple of years. And it's a day that those of us who are in the nonprofit sector, and the John Locke Foundation is one of those, we are a 501c3 organization. We ask each of you who enjoy the benefits of having this organization here to think about what it means to North Carolina to have the John Locke Foundation. And we would be very honored if you would think about making a financial contribution to our organization as you look at the end of the year and the organizations that you might be supporting with your philanthropy. Giving Tuesday is a really nice opportunity for you to do that. We would ask you tomorrow to join the rest of the folks who support nonprofits around the country to go to our website at johnlocke.org, and should you want to support our work, you can do it right there. We do have a matching fund opportunity. We have a generous supporter of Carolina Journal, the newspaper and the online site, who's agreed to match any $10 donation made tomorrow as part of Giving Tuesday. So we would just humbly request that you think about that, and if you like what we're doing, to please go ahead and go to johnlocke.org to help us out there. And by the way, I just see an old friend, Ballard Everett, is sitting here in the audience. Hey, Ballard, nice to see you. Sure.
So you said $10. If I donate 20, that doesn't count?
Well, I'll tell you what, we would gladly accept your 20, and would be... You know what, I think maybe we can go back to that supporter and see what he or she would do. No, we accept donations of any size, no matter how small. There you go. And I'm sure John Pritchett, who's sitting right here, would say any size. Exactly. So, no, we certainly appreciate any level of generosity to help us do our work, because this is the way we do our work. We bring you these presentations, and you are essential to us being able to do that. I want to give you just a quick update over the next couple of weeks in our holiday schedule as we all prepare to celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas. We will have next Monday Ryan Self. He'll be joining us. He is with the Old Mecklenburg Brewery. He's going to be talking about North Carolina's craft beer industry, how we got to be best in the South, and how we move forward to be best in the entire country. He's going to talk a little bit about the regulatory environment for the craft beer industry. And then, maybe we'll ask about that. We'll put in a request. December 12th, then, we're going to be joined by a professor from Duke University who's going to talk about Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton in the news, of course, these days. Alexander Hamilton's liberalism, distinguishing fact and myth. So we have 2 more weeks with you. Then we're going to take our holiday break. We will return on January 9th with our own Becky Gray, who will be preparing, of course, for the new legislative session. She's going to give us a look at the legislative session, what she thinks may be happening, and of course the John Locke Foundation's goals for the session, which would be to continue to expand freedom and liberty and opportunity. So that brings us to today. Now, John Hood, everyone essentially knows John's name. Many people know his face, and to this day he will tell you that many people think he is John Locke. So John Hood and John Locke are not the same people, but certainly John Hood espouses the values and beliefs of John Locke. Many of you know that for years and years he was the president of the John Locke Foundation. He was here from 1995, where he helped found this organization, to 2014. Then he went on to be president of the John William Pope Foundation. That is his primary day job, as they say these days. And if you haven't yet really looked into what the John William Pope Foundation does, I would encourage you to go to their website. You might think that they are only in the business of supporting public policy organizations, but that is far from what is accurate. They support many educational institutions, arts and cultural organizations, and also humanitarian relief. They do a lot of work to try to help folks break the cycle of poverty in North Carolina. It's very important work. I would encourage you to check out their website. We've asked John to come and really draw on his knowledge, his history of North Carolina politics, and his observations about what has occurred over the last months, and certainly on Election Day. And of course now the fact that we have an undecided race for governor. With that, I will give you John Hood.
I'm going to go up under my tie so that if I wander around and turn my head, you won't end up with a different level of sound. This is one of the very few things that I've learned from doing television that is actually valuable. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today. I am going to talk about the elections, and I have chosen the title, Analyze This. How many of you have seen the movie Analyze This? So I was trying to think of a theme or a name of this talk, and the two things that led me to this name would be, first of all, everybody's analyzing this election. Everybody will analyze this election for years, if not decades to come. Lots of people who are analyzing this election also hate the individuals they're analyzing, which I think is coloring their perceptions of the results in one way or the other. And that's sort of one of the themes, at least initially in this film, is Billy Crystal plays the psychiatrist, and of course the other guy's the mafia don, and hilarious events ensue, and I'll just leave it at that. Now, I'm going to talk about this for longer than a moment. But it is possible that I could just give the talk by the following. But I think you'd be disappointed if I just stop right there. So I'm going to fill in some additional gaps. And you should keep in mind that I'm going to do this as a conservative libertarian or a libertarian conservative or whatever I am, and not as a partisan. It's never been my belief that in my role that I should be a partisan. I also believe that I really should never join a political party. I do this because I am a firmly committed Marxist. And you laugh, but I'm very serious. You may remember Marx once observed that, and I'm going to paraphrase him because he talked about a club, but I'm going to say that I would never want to belong to a political party that would allow me to be a member of that party. Groucho Marx, of course, is who I'm talking about. Some of you were thinking Harpo. No, Harpo was a communist, but Groucho's okay. All right, so we'll talk about the elections, but I'm not going to walk through every race that you already know. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize that. I'm going to talk about 5 clusters and 2 coalitions, what North Carolina voters said they did based upon polls that have been taken either on Election Day or after the results of the election, and then what North Carolina conservatives can do. So, you may remember this line from the movie. You don't hear the word no a lot, do you? Well, I hear it all the time, only it's more like, no, please, no. So, what I'm going to suggest, first of all, I like people arguing with me, and I will give you time to do that. Let me try to get through some of the presentation. So if you have a particular argument you want to make, great. Stick a pin in it, pull it out, and let it explode in a few minutes. But if you have a clarifying question, by all means, go ahead and ask, and I want to make sure I don't lose. I've got a lot of information to present in a short period of time. So instead of going through all the different elections, what I'm going to do is just show you a couple of slides based on something I created many years ago called the North Carolina Election Index. And And what I essentially do is I take a lot of different electoral results and I create a scale, and essentially 100% is Republican. I mean, you can scale it for either party, but I'll just say 100% Republican to 0% Republican to show you the trends over time. So this is things like governorships, control the legislature, control the Supreme Court, control the congressional delegation, the U.S. Senate seats, even county commissions are part of this story. And you can see that starting in 1950, the Republican Party is essentially outside of Randolph County and Moore County, a few other places. The Republican Party is irrelevant in North Carolina politics. And then you get into the 60s and it comes up a little bit. 66 was a good year for the Republicans. Then you get to 72, which was a big spike. This was Richard Nixon won the state. Jim Holshouser was elected the first Republican governor in modern times. Jesse Helms was elected the first Republican U.S. senator in modern times. Then you see Watergate, which was a pretty devastating loss. There was, after the Watergate election of 74, out of 50 state senators in North Carolina, how many Republicans were there? One. It was 49-1. Then you get to Ronald Reagan's election. Then you get to Ronald Reagan's re-election. This is when Jim Martin was elected governor. Jesse Helms was re-elected against Jim Hunt. Then you get some more fall off. But essentially, if you were to do a logarithm of this, it would be going up. And of course, this is Barack Obama. This is what happened after Barack Obama screwed things up. Now, this is the elections as of this year, 69% Republican strength, but this assumes McCrory is governor. Okay? So let's look at the same chart. If Cooper is governor, it goes to 58%. It matters, but it's not the whole story. North Carolina has always been a state where the legislature is the strongest branch, and there's a lot of diffused electoral executive branch authority, and we see that today. The Republicans now have a majority on the council state for the first time. All right, now let's talk about clusters for a second, because I do not find the terms conservative, liberal, and moderate to tell you very much of anything. Unfortunately, that's the way a lot of data would be presented, and I don't think it helps you understand what's happening, certainly not this year. The Gallup organization, which doesn't do election polling anymore, which allows them to do other things better, they've been doing these two sets of questions for a very long time, all right? And the first question is, some people think the government is trying to do too many things that should be left to individuals and businesses. Others think the government should be doing more to solve the country's problems, which comes closer to your view. And the other is, some people think the government should promote traditional values in our society. Others think the government should not favor any particular set of values, which is closer to your view. So let's just show you a couple of pictures about this. This is government's doing too much, and government is doing should be doing more. And you can see that generally speaking, Americans are more likely to say the government's doing too much. There are moments where they don't feel that way. 9/11 changed their mind, and the financial crisis somewhat brought those things together. So did the recession after the 1980s. But in general, this is where we are, and this is where we are right now. A majority, though I wouldn't call it an overwhelming majority, say government is trying to do too much. Now look at the partisan difference, though. Okay? And then remember, this only starts in 2001. If we went back earlier, the partisan difference would be even less. So the parties have become much more coherent, much more unified, respectively, when it comes to should the government do more or should the government do less. And look how the Republicans get very conservative on this question and the Democrats get rather liberal on this question. This is an important thing to store away. This is part of what people talk about when they say the parties are polarized. That's because you don't have liberal Republicans like Lowell Weicker or conservative Democrats like Howell Heflin to kick around anymore. The parties have cohered. Now, on the other question, promoting values, it's a little bit different story. Go back into the early 90s, you will see the government should promote traditional values being significantly higher than the alternative. But around the election of Obama and since then, it's been a little bit more mixed. And if you look at the party difference here, this has independents also. You'll see the Democrats have become even less likely to favor government promoting traditional values. The Republicans have too. The Republicans have too. And the independents are in between on this question. Now, the reason I go through these is because this allows us to create clusters. All right? So this is this horizontal line. Government should do less, government should do more. Okay? And then this vertical line, don't promote traditional values, do promote traditional values. And when Gallup runs these numbers based upon these questions, this is what they come up with. This is another way to think about the electorate. And of course, these circles are not equally sized because I tried to proportionally set them to the percentage of the vote. So here's conservatives, promote traditional values, but other than that, the government shouldn't do very much. These are the progressives. I'm going to now start abandoning the term liberal because they don't want it and I want it back. So I'm going to say progressives here. Don't promote traditional values, but do everything else. And then you have these other groups, libertarians. Now, this is not to say members of the Libertarian Party. Okay? I'm talking about a large group of voters that mostly vote Republican. But they tend to be more economic-oriented and somewhat less interested in the promoting of traditional values group. And similarly, on the populist side, they typically want more government action, but they also believe in traditional values. By the way, the populist group is disproportionately minority. Lots and lots of voters who want bigger government, but also have traditional social values. African American voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, East Asian voters, I should say. Okay. This is a group that isn't quite sure. And, you know, they don't have a coherent philosophy, and they don't have to. I mean, this is America. And they get to vote anyway. And this matters. This is not an insignificant percentage of the vote. Keep that in mind. All right. Now, if we look on this as partisan coalitions, almost all the conservatives and, you know, maybe 2/3 of the libertarians in this category, they vote Republican most of the time. Okay? Almost all progressives, most populists vote Democrat most of the time. Centrists go back and forth. Don't get too carried away with the exact numbers, but this is essentially conceptually correct. Why does a small number of conservatives vote Democrat? Why does a small number of hard left people vote Republican? This is not a perfect sign. There are people who vote on all sorts of different reasons, but there's always a little sliver that doesn't follow what you would think. So this is the pre-2016 way to think about the two partisan coalitions. All right? Now let's see what happens in the post-2006. You notice the elephant has sprouted some hair. And here's what you see. Remember, this is the pre-coalition. This is the post-coalition. Some populists come up and vote for Trump, and maybe other Republicans, though we're not actually clear about that. And some of the more libertarian-type voters don't. They go down the other way. The actual vote shares, if you include third party and you sort of think about who the third party are, they change a little bit, but not dramatically. But the who voted for whom does clearly change somewhat in this story. Now, if this doesn't bowl you over that the world has suddenly spun around on its axis or something fundamentally different has happened in America, that's the point. I'm trying to discount what other people are panicky or very excited about, that the world is completely different. I don't think it is completely different. The elections are important. They determine who has power. They determine who's going to make policy over the next several years. But they didn't completely scramble the deck. That's just unlikely. That's not how human beings are. Now, before I get to some specifics about the election results, I'm going to talk you through something real quick that would help you follow something later on. Let's talk about how public opinion gets influenced. We tend to assume that influencing public opinion means persuading people of something. So Ballard doesn't agree with me, which is a problem because he really should. So he doesn't agree with me about something. And so I'm going to make a really strong argument to Ballard, and he's got his, yeah, but I try again, and I try again. And eventually, I persuade Ballard. This is the model that we typically think about. We think about public opinion and how to influence it. but it's not the only way the public opinion get influenced. So let's talk about three other things. A conformity effect. Over time, if you have a tension between the leader of a party and the voters tend to gravitate towards the leader's view. It's a conformity effect. A range effect is somewhat different. The idea there is, you've got an idea out there and it's really radical, and it makes a different idea seem more acceptable. It's more reasonable because it's not, well, at least it's not that. And then a compromise effect is even more explicit. I hate that radical idea. I'm terrified of it. I'll take a compromise, something less than that. So you haven't really been persuaded, but you say yes because you think it's in your interest. That's a compromise effect. Now you see that I like matrices, so here's another one. These are the 4 different kinds of effects. And the more radical you get, the more you're going to stick with a compromise or a range effect. And the less radical, it's easier to persuade somebody to accept a modest change in their view rather than a fundamental change in their view. Okay? And it's easier for a leader to influence the population when they're not radically different. Okay? I'm going to give you an example. I know this is kind of conceptual, but let me give you an example of the Charter School Bill of 1996. I like this example for 2 reasons. Number one, I was there. I actually made all 4 of these arguments. Number 2, I think it's familiar enough that people can see the point. So if you're trying to persuade people to support the passage of the Charter School Bill in 96, you would say, you know, I know you're not crazy about this right off the blush, but parental choice is a valuable thing. And keep in mind, this is just within public schools, and it's carefully controlled, and there's a cap of 100 schools. And it's not that, we should try this. This seems like something worth trying because the kids really matter. Their futures are on we should take some risks to improve education. And you'll persuade some people. You've also got a conformity effect. Governor Hunt at the time and the Democrat-controlled State Board of Education was in favor of the bill. Some Democrats voted for it, came to believe it was a good idea because they were following their leader. That's okay too. A third thing is that the Republicans that controlled the North Carolina House at the time favored school vouchers, and they passed the school voucher bill. And the Democrats who were in control of the Senate and the governorship said, ugh, we have to do something to stop the momentum. Charter school is a reasonable compromise. This was explicitly the plan, by the way, I know this. Or, you know, if there are people out there who think we should have school choice that includes private schools and homeschools, maybe charter schools are really not that radical an idea. Now that's not quite the same as a compromise effect. This is otherwise called the Overton window. You may have heard my friend Joe Overton's concept that you shift the Overton window, you make it more an idea that seems radical more acceptable by maybe advocating something even further out on the edge. So I just wanted you to remember that analysis for future reference. Now let's talk about what the voters said on Election Day or right after. Mostly I'm going to talk about North Carolina, and mostly I'm going to use polls that were taken after the election, but I will tell you if I don't. So here's a national one just to give you a sense. Pew Research does a poll, had been doing a poll since '88. They asked people to grade the 2 major party candidates from A to F. And you can see the winning candidates always get a higher grade, almost always get a higher grade. 2000 it was sort of a wash. The whole election was a wash. But here in 2016 the story's different. Both candidates get a fairly low grade. I think that's important to remember. In North Carolina, how satisfied were you with your presidential choices? Vary or somewhat, actually is 56%, but that is smaller than it usually is. 43% said they were not satisfied at all with their choices. Was there more or less negative campaigning? More, 86%. How much did you hear about state government, State Department emails? 91% heard a lot about that. You cannot escape the fact that was a big part of the story in October and a big part of the election result. Would you consider voting for a third-party candidate in 2020? Yes, 53%. I'm not saying they will, they won't, but this does suggest a level of dissatisfaction that we should all understand. Okay. How did Donald Trump win? I didn't think he was going to win. I didn't think he was going to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I did not think so. Some people did, I understand. But I did not think that. I should have thought more clearly about what do people do when they hate everybody? Because that was the story. If you look at the poll, you will see what I mean. Opinion of Clinton and Trump. Both have a favor, 2%, 1%, crazy people thought both were nice people. They're so small we don't even measure them in the electorate. 41% said they had only a favorable opinion of Hillary Clinton. She won almost all of them. Same percentage. Trump's only favorable. Trump won almost all of them. Unfavorable opinion about both. Trump creamed Hillary Clinton among the people who didn't like either one of them. Okay? The anti-anti vote was the determining factor in this election. There's many other pieces of evidence. Who's qualified to serve as president? Both are. Again, those are the nuts. Neither is 10%, but that's enough. Okay? They voted 2-1 for Donald Trump. Neither is qualified. Why not try something completely different? Okay? Which candidate is honest? Neither is honest is the key voting group. They voted for Trump. Not quite as strongly as the other categories, but still voted for him. You take a dishonest non-politician over a dishonest politician. Which candidate has the right temperament? Neither does. Trump wins. Okay? And finally, when did you make your decision? If you made it before October, Clinton won by a little bit. It was really in the last month, and in fact it was in the last 2 weeks that the election broke. Now some of you may have read that there's a lot of liberal media spin that is based upon their anger, resentment, and the fact that no one will talk to them. But if you talk to reporters who actually know Trump people and talk to them internally, as I have, you will discover that Trump's people did not think he was going to win. They didn't think he was going to win even as late as mid-October. Two things changed. Number one, the Jim Comey announcement, which elevated her negatives at the right time, reminded people why they don't like her, and didn't trust her and didn't think she was qualified. And the other thing is, the Trump people rejiggered their polling. They started to look at the early voting, and they started to see who was turning out, and they made a change in their model. And when they changed their model, they saw Michigan go from we're down 6 or whatever it was to wait, we're competitive. When they changed their model in Pennsylvania, wait, we're competitive. And so that's what they did. The Hillary people were high-fiving and planning, picking out draperies, and they weren't looking at the polling closely enough to model. You think about it, okay? This is a race where she won a plurality of the popular vote, not that that matters in a constitutional sense, but she had enough voters out there to potentially be president. They were just in the wrong place. She spent a lot of time fighting for North Carolina. She didn't need North Carolina. What she needed to have done was to block Trump in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Did not do that until the very end. They were caught with their britches down. So as much as this is about the candidates, it's also about the people who were making the decisions. And the Trump people, who were ridiculed for not having experience, they did know something about modeling their polling that the other side did not. Yeah?
Why her emphasis on fundraising? Even the last 2 weeks she was fundraising.
So that when she was president, she wouldn't have this big debt.
No, but rather than go to,
I'm not kidding.
rather than go to Michigan.
I'm going to be president, but what I don't want is this big campaign debt. I'm convinced that they just didn't see the possibility that Michigan and Pennsylvania would be stolen out from under them. Okay. In North Carolina, are you happy or unhappy that Trump will be president? 44% are happy, 39% unhappy, the rest, jury's out. You will see something like this in a lot of places. Okay? Not that more people are unhappy than happy, that's unlikely, but probably not a majority being happy is also a likely scenario. How happy are you that GOP will control the Senate? Quite a bit more. People have more, they know what they're going to get, they think, out of the Republican Senate, maybe a little bit less out of the Trump administration. Who should take the lead in solving the nation's problems? The plurality answer is both Congress and President Trump working together, but if you had to choose, Congress actually gets the edge over Trump. So the voters somewhat more trustful of the Republican Congress than they are of Donald Trump. Keep that in mind. Don't let anybody tell you any different. Okay. Now let's get into a couple of specific issues of interest to free market people like me. This is in the exit poll. What's the effect of international trade on employment? Most actually say it either creates jobs or has no effect on jobs, but 39%, a significant number, say it takes away jobs. Trump did win that vote significantly, but he also won a fair amount of the vote from these groups too. So this is not the case where all the Trump voters are against free trade. Some of the Trump voters are against free trade, some are for it. And keep in mind, there's some union folks over here who voted for Clinton, and they don't like free trade either. So this does not cohere on party lines. Now remember that conformity effect argument I was making earlier? Trade is a really good example of this. If you go back over time, you will find that when your party is in control, you tend to think free trade is okay. And when your party's out of control, you tend to be suspicious that the other side is going to sign some bad trade deal. Okay? So as recently as a couple of years ago, most Republicans thought free trade was good for the U.S. There's a pretty significant gap. But now in the age of Trump, it has gone completely the other way, 68 to 24. Do you think that most voters have been following closely the debates about trade among international economists? No. Trump is suspicious of trade. Trump is the leader. That does affect people's perceptions of issues when the issues are not from their own personal experience. Foreign policy is a good example. Trade is a good example. Other issues, abortion does not change very much depending upon who the leader is. You see what I mean? Something that's more personal, you have more of a specific rationale for or against. Among Democrats, actually, if we take this graph out further, they were more suspicious of trade when Bush was president than when Obama was president. They gave, well, maybe it's not so bad. And now they're quite much free traders. We'll see what happens in the next several years. Immigration. What effects do immigrants have on the economy? They help the country. They hurt the country. Okay. Trump won a significant almost all these voters, but there's more of these voters, and he won some of them. Reality is messy. What should we do about illegal immigrants? Offer them legal status? 69% of the voters said yes. That doesn't mean citizenship, by the way. It just means legal status. 25% deport. If you do the math, you will see that most Trump voters do not favor deporting illegal immigrants. Some do. Again, read this carefully. Don't jump to conclusions based upon headlines. Now, talk about North Carolina a little bit more specifically at HB2. Everybody's got a theory or an opinion about HB2, and here's what I will tell you. Most voters say they oppose HB2. This is in the exit poll. 65% opposed, 29% in favor. Look at the gubernatorial vote between Roy Cooper and Pat McCrory. If you do the math on this, you will discover that about as many people who voted for McCrory oppose HB2 as support HB2. So his electorate was about half and half. Cooper was more obviously against HB2. Here's some sort of an exit poll from High Point taken after the election. Is HB2 necessary to protect public safety and privacy? 39% yes, 58% no. This is the source of a lot of the opposition. Is not necessarily people disagreeing with some of the elements of HB2. They're just not convinced that its benefits are worth the perceived costs that HB2 has inflicted or Roy Cooper has inflicted through his lobbying against companies, or however you think about it. On the other hand, look at this question. Allow cities to adopt anti-discrimination ordinances that include LGBT people. 45% say yes, 46% say no. Much more of a mixed story there. And if you look a little bit more closely at the bathroom, shower, locker room issue, again, this is from the Civitas poll that was taken before the election, but it's consistent. The Civitas poll found that most people opposed HB2. However, they also asked people, what is the fair, reasonable approach to bathrooms, showers, and locker rooms? Is it a biological sex standard for government facilities, but let private companies do whatever they want? That's HB2. Or a gender self-identification standard applied to both government and privately owned buildings. You'll see the plurality winner is actually this. So interpret HB2 carefully as well. On foreign policy, should the U.S. play an active role in world affairs or stay out? Active role wins, but not by a whole lot. Is the world becoming safer, more dangerous? Definitely more dangerous. National security vote was a lot of that story, that anti-anti vote. I don't like either one, but Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. The world's kind of a mess. I'll try somebody else. Maybe he'll hire a good person. Okay? Very quickly, an issue we care about, school vouchers. This was a poll right before the election. There's the plurality support, but the opposition is not insignificant. It's 42% opposed and 49% in favor. This is an unsettled issue, but people generally favor choice more than they don't. Now finally, on the election, I'm going to tell you real quick my own take, which is that people are talking about the urban-rural divide, and they're leaving out the largest share of the voters who live in the suburbs. So there was an N&O editorial yesterday that was all about the urban-rural divide and made reference to people who clearly are in the suburbs. And I'm not sure where they think suburbs, whether they matter, but I'll show you they matter a lot. These are the exit polls of the last 3 presidential elections. Urban vote went from 29% to about 37%. Self-identified, these are people who say they live in an urban, suburban, or rural environment. Well, look how rural goes down and suburban goes up. This is the real story. People who either live in the same place, but now there's all these other people who live near them and they feel like they're in the suburbs, or people who used to live down east somewhere and now they live in Johnston County, which is also down east, but it's also a suburb. Okay? Now keep that in mind when I show you this. I know this is complicated, but very quickly, I'm going to compare in North Carolina the Senate race, the presidential race, and the governor's race. Okay? And this will, I think, be very clear about who won and by how much and why. Richard Burr, by the way, won by 6 points. Donald Trump in North Carolina won by about 3.8 points. So Richard Burr was the highest vote getter among the 3 in terms of the share of the vote. And Richard Burr, compare Richard Burr versus the other 2, okay? The other 2, well, let's start with president. Richard Burr got a higher percentage of the urban vote than Trump. That's the main difference between the 2. They actually got roughly the same suburban vote and rural vote, almost exactly the same. But Richard Burr got a little bit more vote out of urban counties. That's how he did better than Trump. Okay? Now let's compare Trump to McCrory. Trump got about 63,000 more votes than McCrory according to the latest tally. So McCrory underperformed Trump by 63,000 votes. How come? Well, it wasn't in the urban areas. Okay? It really wasn't. It wasn't in the urban area. Cooper did outperform Clinton in the urban areas, but that's entirely a third-party issue. In other words, people voted for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein or something, and then they voted for Roy Cooper. But Trump and McCrory, about the same. In fact, I counted it up. I think the difference in the actual vote count is like 400 votes in the urban counties, or the urban vote versus the other. So what really happened between the Trump vote and the McCrory vote is in the suburban areas, where McCrory did a little bit worse, and the rural areas where he did substantially worse. Now, if this comports with what the N&O writes, then I can't read. But I'm pretty sure I can read. So the N&O is saying this is about how McCrory lost Wake County, Mecklenburg. No, Trump also lost Wake and Mecklenburg by exactly the same amount. That's not the reason McCrory came below. I'm not saying he lost, but he did underperform Trump. And that is because he didn't do as well in the suburban and particularly the rural counties. Now, you can tell whatever story you want to out of that. When you have a vote margin of a few thousand votes, anything could explain the difference. But just keep that in mind. Now, this is how people identify themselves. You can also do it according to what county they live. This is where I differ from some of my political analyst friends who have a very generous definition of the term urban. And they end up saying that most of the vote is urban. And the way you do that is that you classify Alamance County, Barry, as urban. Now, if you've ever been to Alamance County, you know there are people who live there who work in Greensboro and people who live there who work in Raleigh. but it's not an urban place. Davidson County is not an urban place. So if you're a little bit more sophisticated about this and you assume that urban means, actually the technical definition should be 1,000 people per square mile. Okay, there are only 3 counties fit that bill, Wake, Mecklenburg, and New Hanover. But I'm going to be more generous and say 750 people per square mile. That gives you 6 counties, Wake, Mecklenburg, New Hanover, Durham, Guilford, and Forsyth. And that's about 36% of the vote. And a little bit larger percent, maybe 40% of the vote are in these suburban ring counties or in these what I call smaller city counties, places like Buncombe County, which has a city in it, but it's not very urban. If you've ever been to the mountains, it's not urban. Okay. So when you add all this up, you will see, by the way, all the rest of the counties I'll count as truly rural. That's about a quarter of the vote. And I ran the numbers, and you don't have to look at these, but essentially it confirms exactly the same analysis. Richard Burr did better than Donald Trump because he did better in urban areas. They did about the same in everywhere else. Pat McCrory did worse than Donald Trump because he underperformed in the suburbs and rural areas. That's it. Okay. Let me give you several lessons for us for me, as a conservative in North Carolina. First of all, these election results are very important. All elections are important. This is the most important election in my lifetime. Says everybody every time. And that's fine. I'm not going to debate that. People can have different sense of values or whatever. I do not personally think the 2016 election is transformational. I don't think it throws out all the rules. Some of the rules are clearly outdated, but it doesn't throw them all out. It doesn't change everything. Most Republican-leaning voters still vote Republican, even if Donald Trump is someone they don't as much like as the previous, but still going to vote for him because they don't like the other side. Same is true for the Democrats. And these partisan allegiances do not shift in radical ways in just a couple of years. And they didn't this time either. Indeed, the Republican candidates running for Congress, Republican candidates running around the country for other offices did better than Trump most of the time. Now, not always. Sometimes Trump led the ticket ahead of the Senate candidate, but not usually. Transformational, no. Important, absolutely. Second, North Carolina is a very competitive state. I showed you several pieces of information that would tell you that. Democrats can win just because the Republicans had a winning streak from 2010 to 2014. Didn't mean they were going to win everything in 2016, and they didn't win everything in 2016. We don't know yet about the gubernatorial race. The North Carolina Supreme Court race, in my mind, was essentially a ballot screw-up. I think the voters intended to vote for the Republican for that race. In all the other races that were partisan, the first one on the ballot was the Republican. This is the only reasonable explanation for that outcome, Mike Morgan defeating Bob Edmonds, because the Court of Appeals races all went Republican. I like Richard Dietz very much. He's a friend of mine. I doubt very seriously that voters in Catawba County were reading down the ballot and they saw Richard Dietz. He's a fine jurist. I'll vote for him. And Bob Edmonds, who's that? I don't think so. I think they meant to vote Republican and the ballot screwed them up. Now, what you do about that is a different story entirely. But other than that, what I would say is Republicans are doing well in North Carolina, but they're not going to win every time, no matter what they do. It's a very competitive place. Democrats still matter. It's still very closely divided. And Republicans have very little, or Democrats, have very little room for error. How did Roy Cooper do better than most of the other Democrats on the ballot? He was competitive in rural counties and in smaller city counties like Nash County, where he's from. Sir.
Real quick, will the legislature add Republican and Democrat back to the ballot now? I thought they were going to do that.
They did add it back to the ballot for Court of Appeals. They didn't do it for the Supreme Court. The plan for the Supreme Court seat was originally a retention election. There was a lawsuit. The Court of Appeals tossed that idea. It was appealed to the Supreme Court. Bob Edmonds would have been effective, so he recused himself, and so the Supreme Court did not overturn the Court of Appeals, and so you ended up with really something I don't think the legislature intended, which was a nonpartisan competitive race for Supreme Court and a partisan competitive race for Court of Appeals. There's no logical distinction between these two. I would have been much happier way before we knew the results if they'd gone party line. My own view about judicial elections is they should be partisan, real elections, or we shouldn't have them. The in-between is the worst possible. This is a compromise that is worse than either of the alternatives. Either we should have a gubernatorial appointment confirmation like the federal judges are, or we should have real elections with party labels, but not anything in between. I'm convinced of that. I think this election will probably convince a lot more people of that. Okay, next point. The Republican coalition is still mostly voters who are conservative or liberty-leaning. There is now a larger number of populists, maybe somewhat fewer of the libertarian-type voters, but it is mostly still a fusion of conservative and libertarian-type voters. You can see it in the Senate races, you can see it in the national polls, you can see it any way you want to see it. It's a coalition, though. I don't mean they're all the same. Obviously, they're different. That's why I was showing you the different clusters. People come in different flavors. But the flavors sort of end up in one side of the ice cream stand or the other side of the ice cream stand. And finally, most importantly for this audience, free markets, fiscal restraint, fiscal conservatism, lower taxes, consumer choice, these remain powerful ideas. I don't just mean in a ideological sense. These are powerful, the power of ideas. Ideas have consequences. I agree with all of that. But I also mean they have political power. Almost every time voters were presented with a candidate who said, I'm going to raise your taxes, and a candidate who said, I'm going to cut your taxes, they went for cutting the taxes. Almost every time they were confronted with a candidate who said, I want to spend a lot more money, even if it means raising taxes, and someone who said, well, I'll spend more money on some things, but I want to keep things and keep the budget in balance, the voters went for this alternative. In almost every case where there was a tax increase on the ballot in North Carolina, and there were, 17 or so votes around different counties, the voters said no in almost every case, 15 out of the 17 times. So on taxes and fiscal restraint, on markets, on who should make decisions, parents and patients, for example, in healthcare or education versus government officials, the voters are with the free market position more often than not. Now that's different from saying that, of course, all elections are going to turn out the way you want, or that people who say they're for these things are then going to go do them. It's quite a different story. So what I will leave you with and take questions at this point is the following observation. Politics is more than elections. Politics, in a sort of old school Aristotelian sense, is about apportioning the power to coerce on a regular basis, and then exercising that power. So politics is not just about election day or early voting or whatever. Politics is about what happens in the legislature in 2017, what happens in Congress in 2017, what happens on your school board, what happens on your county commission, what happens in your city, what happens in the White House. So politics is not punctuated equilibrium. Oh, no more politics. 4 years from now, we'll tune back in. You have to tune in all the time. The political process unfolds all the time. We now have a Trump administration coming into Washington, maybe a new administration coming into Raleigh. People who believe strongly in free markets and limited government can't just say, well, I like that, I'll tune back in 2 or 4 years, or I hate that, I'm going to tune back in 2 or 4 years. They need to be engaged immediately. Who does Trump pick? Does he pick from this group or this group? Matters a lot, not just for policy, but also for future political interests. What's the relative proportion of power between Congress and the White House? My guess is we're going to have a more Congress-led debate for a while. Be my guess, but we'll see. Similarly, what is the debate between Washington, or the balance of power between Washington and the states? If the Trump administration and the Republican Congress follow through on their promises, more decisions will be devolved back to the states on things like education and Medicaid and health care and transportation. We ought to get the federal government out of most of the transportation business, for example. And what that means is it becomes more important who the governor is, who the legislature is, the decisions that they make. I think that's good news. And I've been counseling a little bit liberal friends who are freaked out about Trump. I say, first of all, people get freaked out about presidents all the time, and then they live through it. It'll be okay, calm down. Also, if you are you freaked out about the despot Donald Trump, and by the way, you mourn the death of Fidel Castro, then I'm not going to have a conversation with you that's going to go anywhere helpful. But what I'm also counseling them to think about is, yes, I know you're upset about the Electoral College, and you want to, just like in 2000, you want to go through this frenzy of left-wing bashing of the Electoral College. But I want you to understand that really is completely pointless. We're not going to change the system. Small states are not going to give it up. They're not going to amend the Constitution. I understand you're angry, but let's channel that anger into something more helpful than the Electoral College. And by the way, we don't really know what would have happened if the two candidates had run national elections. We don't have any idea. Trump would have spent more time turning out Republicans in Texas. Clinton would have spent more time turning out votes in California, New York. The popular vote probably would be very close. I don't know who would have won. Nobody knows who would have won. So just assuming, well, we know Hillary Clinton would have won if we had a popular vote, misses the whole point. That's like saying, you're going to score the football game going in on the basis of yards gained, total yards gained. And then after the game is over, say, by the way, no, it's going to be touchdowns. The games would have unfolded differently if the rules had been different at the front. That having been said, what I've been telling left-wing friends is, if you want to be channeling something like old and constitutional, let's talk about federalism. If you're really concerned about the Trump administration and the horrible things it will do to you in California, then you should join with your conservative colleagues and devolve power to the states. And let California do pretty much whatever they want in a whole host of areas, and let Alabama do pretty much whatever they want to do in a whole host of areas, and just reduce the stakes in the presidential election. If you're so worried about it, let's give the president, whoever it is, less power. I'm for that. And with that, let's see if you have any comments or questions for me. Yes?
What do you attribute the low vote for the third candidate?
Third-party candidates tend to dive at the end. So he actually ended up, higher than most third-party candidates are. But I thought he might get maybe 5 points. He didn't get 5 points. Partly, he just didn't run a very good campaign. He wasn't very impressive. When he got media attention, it wasn't very flattering. Aleppo, I guess, does sound like an acronym, but you really ought to, if you're going to be president of the United States, you need to do that. Now, I do also remember a presidential debate in which Donald Trump was asked about the nuclear triad, and he clearly had no idea what it was. But at least he talked to radio. Nuclear is very important to me, I think was his answer, which at least is better than saying, what's a nuclear? Eric Johnson's version. Yes, sir.
Sir, recently I noticed in my age group a lot of people embracing socialism and now this alt-right nationalist populism type thing. Those are very concerning to me, and I think they're both disgusting. Do you think as that demographic grows or matures, that will change? Or is there something that needs to be tapped into to try to pull people away from these two completely bizarre, off-the-wall ideologies?
Well, it's your fault. You millennials are just going to ruin everything. And also, when Socrates was out corrupting the young, and other people in Athens said, "Oh, these young people today, they're going to destroy our country." There is a healthy element of stupidity that crops up in every 18 to 24-year-old. Except for me, I was perfectly sane. But I would not get too carried away thinking that we're going to have the next generation who venerates Che Guevara. I doubt it. They don't really know who he is. They just think he's like a brand name for a coffee or something. And I think that the internet has done many wonderful things, but it has also liberated crazy people to meet up with other crazy people and create some really weird, sort of narrow fringe movements. Previously, you had to have at least enough money to publish a newsletter. And now you can just go on Facebook and have a group and it doesn't cost anything. these alt-right people, I take them very seriously, not because they're numerous, but because I know exactly what they're trying to do. I had a fight with one of them a couple of years ago, not a fist fight, but they want to destroy the conservative movement. I mean, the organization that I spent my entire adult life building, they truly want to destroy them. Steve Bannon does. They want to. They believe that. And I take that very seriously. But I don't think they'll win. I think that their ideas don't fit together very well, and I don't think they will be compelling to most people. I don't think they would work if they were tried. So I am not panicked at all. On the other hand, should we be tolerant of people who engage in intolerance? No, but be careful, because when you start one, I mean, and I'm all for calling out the socialists and the alt-right fascists and so forth. But the problem is that lots of people cannot apparently make a distinction. In the last month, I don't know if Corey and the Locke folks have noticed this, but our liberal counterparts have begun calling us the alt-right John Locke Foundation. And that is very, I would say they're just really dumb, but I don't think that's it. I think that they don't care about the distinction. They don't understand they do understand the alt-right is ultimately about destroying the John Locke Foundation. But they want to identify us with these fringe elements for their own purposes. Yes, it becomes an umbrella term, a term without appropriate that's applied to anyone. Richard Burr is now alt-right. I saw that the other day. But whatever you think about Richard Burr, he's about the least alt-right you could possibly imagine. He doesn't even wear socks. He's always like one step removed from the golf course. This is not an alt-right person.
Very quickly, did I understand you to say that Steve Bannon had his intent on destroying the Locke Foundation?
He's just intent on destroying the conservative movement, as he has said on numerous occasions. And I know enough people, I don't know him, but I know enough people who are thinking along these lines. I know exactly what they mean. This is essentially Pat Buchanan's revenge. So in the 90s, Pat Buchanan tried to steer a movement, not just politically, but within the conservative movement, to change it in a fundamental way. And not very many people followed him. So he went off and started his own magazine, and some other people went and followed him up. And it's sort of a group that's right now feeling ascendant. And it has some grudges. Some of those grudges are very personal. I know some of these grudges. I didn't get that job. I should have gotten that job. Why did they hire that other person? And they're mad about it. And Steve Bannon had an organization, Breitbart, which Andrew Breitbart, by the way, would have been horrified by, who has employed some of these people. And that's what their goal is. They want to destroy the American Enterprise Institute. And I mean, they have a very specific agenda, which I've heard directly. It won't work. I'm not worried about it, but I know exactly what they're about. I know that they're my enemy. It's okay.
John,
Next question.
you can time that with Rick Lowry, Eric Erickson, and Fred Barnes, who were they did not want to accept Trump. I mean, they've been trashing him.
You mean Bill Kristol?
Bill Kristol. They've been trashing him after he got the nomination.
They did.
So, I mean, I can understand someone being ticked off about the conservatives, but you got to understand what the conservatives, I mean, the way they pass budgets, they're not conservative. They run as conservatives, and they legislate differently. And you've seen that.
Oh, sure. There are lots of differences between rhetoric and reality in politics, including among Republicans. However, make no mistake, the Pat Buchanan, Steve Bannon wing does not care a whole lot about balanced budgets. That's not what they're about. This is about nationalism. It's about trade and immigration. It's about racial issues. That's what it's about. It's not about the balanced budget, which I agree with them.
One quick question.
Yes.
The original premise that Brennan is like Buchanan. I question.
Buchanan has a very specific set of beliefs, which he has advocated for decades. Bannon is a bit more of an opportunist. He's a bit more of a business person and less of an ideologue. But I'm only quoting him. I mean, he literally said, I want to destroy the conservative movement. That's what he has said several times. I'm not making that up. Now, what he means,
One example of the conservative movement
he wants to destroy the organizations that are the most prominently associated groups in the conservative movement. Okay? So what the groups I mentioned earlier, the Wall Street Journal, National Review, the Weekly Standard, state think tanks like John Locke that are more free market oriented, they literally think that this entire movement is wrong and it needs to be ripped up and destroyed and reconstituted in a different way. Now, I'm not trying to oversell the point. I'm not particularly fearful of them. I don't think it's going to succeed. I think that they've got about as many different opinions as they have members of their movement, so they don't even have a coherent agenda. I'm not that worried about it, but I do know what they're trying to do, and I would certainly fight that because I think that we need to be, as organizations and as a movement, we need to stand for timeless principles of individual liberty and free markets and limited government. And we should ally with anybody who agrees with any part of that to accomplish our goals. But if someone says that is fundamentally not what conservatism should be about, it shouldn't be about limited government, it should not be about free enterprise, free markets, I say, well, I disagree with you, and I think that you will not win.
I didn't realize you said that.
Yeah, he specifically said he wants to destroy the conservative movement. And I know what he means by that, and some of it is ideological and some of it is truth. Yeah.
John, how much of that goes back to sort of the con versus neocon divide? And
Sure.
I mean, a lot of us, including myself, don't view neocons really highly because they're not free market people; they're big government conservatives.
Right.
Conservative. So I mean, but how much of that divide is along, sort of has its origins in the current divide you're talking about has its origins in this
There is. There's a long
anti-neocon.
Yes. There's a long-standing divide that even goes to the early days of the Reagan administration, which you might remember.
Not that old. I'm not that old.
Is that right? No, you were that old. You were just in the wrestling business at that time. You may remember the early stages of the Reagan administration. There was the key appointment of the National Humanities. Who would be head of the National Institute of Humanities? National Endowment for Humanities. And the choices were Mel Bradford and Bill Bennett. And the Reagan folks went with Bill Bennett. And the partisans of Mel Bradford, including Pat Buchanan, were appalled that this neocon, Bill Bennett, who didn't really stand for principles at all, would be in charge of this. Of course, they were even more horrified when he was made Secretary of Education. Ironically, now Bill Bennett is a Trump person and he's worried about the neocons. So this is why this goes around in a circle. But this is an old kind of conflict. And the reason I bring up that particular example, and I know we need to wrap up, just having been around and been in the movement since the 80s and know a fair number of the people that we're talking about, some of it's ideological, some of it is heartfelt disagreements about policy, some of it is personal and it is grudges, and it has to do with who got a job and who didn't get a job, and who gets a grant and who didn't get a grant. And I've just heard it for so many years. I've been marinated in those disputes every time I go to conferences and talk to people about it. There's some people who really want to get back at their antagonists, and we'll see if it works.
John Hood, thank you very much.